Hey everybody, I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us for ILTV's weekly program, One-on-One with Alan Dershowitz. We want to give you, our viewers, a chance to have your questions answered by Professor Dershowitz, one of America's greatest legal minds. He's a leading expert on criminal and constitutional law, civil liberties, and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Hi, Professor Dershowitz. It's so great to have you again.
Thank you.
All right, so let's get started, Professor. As you know, every week we open our show with a special guest. Today we're honored to have several special guests. We'll start with Reserve Colonel Pnina Sharvit Baruch, who is a senior fellow at the Institute of International Strategic Studies. Pnina was also the former head of international law for the IDF and has worked with you several times. She wants to talk about a story which has rocked Israel over the course of the last 9 months. Israeli soldier Elor Azaria was convicted of manslaughter for shooting a terrorist in the head who had already been neutralized by Israeli forces after carrying out a stabbing attack. Pnina wants your take on the situation.
Hi, Alan. I still remember our last meeting in the INSS when we had a very interesting debate about the role of international law in operational situations. And also the time you came to the IDF when I was still there, heading the International Law Department, meeting my officers and talking about all kinds of legal dilemmas. So I'm looking forward to meeting you again soon. And I wanted to talk about the judgment that all of Israel was waiting for, that was given this week in the case of Elor Azaria, the soldier who shot a terrorist who was wounded after the incident already finished, and he was charged with manslaughter and found guilty by the court. This case really showed that even in such situations, we value the rule of law and upholding our moral values as paramount for our, I think, moral superiority and strengths, our moral strengths that is part of our military strength, and I think our court did a good job in upholding these values. This case also raised a public debate about the question of the role of criminal proceedings in these kinds of situations. Should soldiers be in a situation where they might face criminal charges with regard to operational situations, or maybe there's no room for criminal law in such situations? I would like to hear what you think about that.
Well, first, thank you, Pnina. You have served the interests of Israel and the rule of law so well over the years in the various positions that you've held, and you've always done them superbly. Look, the first thing you have to say is this case could arise only in Israel and a handful of other countries around the world. There would be no such case in Turkey. There would be no such case in Egypt. There would be no such case in Jordan. There would be no such case in many parts of the world, certainly not in Russia or in China. Israel, the United States, Great Britain, and maybe a handful of other countries would ever think of putting a soldier on trial for killing somebody who had already engaged in a terrorist act. And the key point is whether or not he had in fact been neutralized. If he was neutralized, if there is absolutely no question that he couldn't press a button and blow himself up and blow up people in the surrounding area, if he were unconscious, for example, and it was clear that he was unconscious, then plainly what the soldier would have done would be improper. On the other hand, if there was any realistic possibility, particularly with suicide bombers, that the terrorist could be feigning and could press a button and blow everybody up, then the act of shooting him might very well be reasonable or at least non-criminal. And the last point you raise is a very important one. Should this be subjected to ordinary criminal justice, or should it be subjected to military justice? And military justice obviously has somewhat more flexibility in recognizing the realities of terrorism and wartime situations. I think the main point is that the rule of law is still in operation. There has been a conviction, there will be a sentence. Presumably the sentence will reflect the realities on the ground, and then there'll be an appeal. And again, there are very few countries in the world which have a legal system that is so widely trusted around the world. So I would leave it to the legal system and see how it operates. Under our freedom of speech, people have the right to protest, people have a right to express their views. That's also part of the rule of law. So I think what we're seeing in Israel from every point of view is the rule of law operating and operating effectively. You might not agree with the result, but that's also part of the way the rule of law operates.
Next, let's hear a follow-up from Reserve Major General Dani Yatom, who was the former head of the Israeli Mossad.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. Do you think that relating to the trial of the soldier that killed a terrorist that already was neutralized by one of his comrades of the soldier and was found recently guilty of manslaughtering, that the panel of 3 judges that sat as the military court was not influenced by the Israeli debate amongst the society that took place for many months until nowadays, where the panel was not influenced by the announcements of the former Minister of Defense, of the Chief of Staff, and many other politicians. Is it possible that they gave the verdict only upon what was told and heard in the court itself?
Well, General Yatom, first of all, thank you for the great service you've performed in protecting not only Israel, but the world against terrorism. You know, in the book of Bereshit, there's a wonderful story about Abraham arguing with God over the sinners of Saddam. And the story starts with God saying, I want to teach Abraham about human justice. And in the end, of course, God knows everything, but humans don't. We act imperfectly, and we act in response to pressures. Judges are human beings, and it's inconceivable that judges could render judgment in a case like this without in some way being influenced by public perception. The question comes particularly ironically and also relevantly from you, who served with such distinction in the Mossad. The Mossad, of course, does claim the right on rare occasions to kill, even when the terrorist is not in the act of killing. Obviously, the Mossad is not the only intelligence agency that does that. Every intelligence agency in the world claims the right to neutralize threats outside the general rule of law. And clearly, we have really 3 criteria here. We have the criteria of intelligence agencies, whether it be the CIA, the Mossad, M6, or any other intelligence agencies in the world, acting outside of the general rules of criminal law. We have the general rules of criminal law, which would apply to me and to civilians. We can't kill if somebody is not posing a threat to us. And then we have the rule of law as applied to ordinary soldiers in combat situations or terrorist situations. And these are very different. And one of the questions is which rule of law applies to a soldier who might be scared out of his wits, who has just seen other soldiers attacked and in some instances perhaps killed by terrorists, who may feel rage, anger, and fright. And should that soldier be judged by the ordinary rules of criminal justice or by special rules that recognize these realities on the ground? I think this is a great subject for debate. I could teach a whole course on this particular case. And I think the most important thing is that it is being debated in Israel. Every point of view is being heard, and the rule of law is being observed.
Well, I'd like to take that course if you one day offer it, Professor. Well, let's hear some questions from our viewers. We have a special treat for you. Our first comes from your very own Rabbi Bill Hamilton from Congregation Kehilath Israel in Brookline, Massachusetts.
Hi, Alan. It's your Rabbi Bill Hamilton here in Jerusalem visiting for a couple weeks. I was thrilled to be with you in New York a couple weeks ago, although I will point out that we're looking forward to seeing you in Shul sometime soon. Meantime, I have a very important question about some news that greeted me when I arrived in Israel a little over a week ago. And the chief rabbinate has rejected the conversion of a number of Venezuelan Jews who actually have yearned to become Jews, studied to become Jews, converted halakhically as Jews, and they are not only ready and willing and active participants in Jewish life, they're actually in danger where they are. The chief rabbinate, in its intransigence, has rejected their conversion. I'm eager to hear, what do you think about this terrible problem?
Well, first of all, Rabbi Hamilton, thank you so much for asking me that question and for being such a great rabbi. You bat mitzvahed our daughter. And of course, like you stand in for my mother would have said the same thing. I hope to see you in shul soon. I promise you I'll come to shul whenever you're giving a sermon. The question is such a profound one and such a difficult one. I think that the concept of pikuach nefesh, the saving of lives, has to be placed before the internecine battles that occur within the Israeli rabbinate. The first thing that has to be done is to get these people out of harm's way, out of Venezuela, bring them to Israel, bring them there as asylum seekers, bring them there in any capacity, just get them out of harm's way and bring them to Israel. And then there can be a debate about what their status is. My own personal belief is that the rabbinate should have absolutely no influence on the law of return. The law of return is a civil law, not a religious law. Russians who came in under the law of return are practicing Christians, but they happen to be related to a Jew. That's the way the law of return was written. It was written in response to the definition of who is a Jew during times of danger for the Jewish community. And Hitler and others, pogromists, Khmelnytsky and others, didn't distinguish between what kind of a Jew you were. And I think the rabbinate has to be taken out of this issue, and the issue has to be made a civil one. And the criteria has to be, if you proclaim your willingness to join the Jewish people and to move to Israel and to join the history of the nation state of the Jewish people, that should be enough. But even under existing law, the rabbinate can't distinguish between conservative reform and Orthodox conversions, and it can't set up this absurd criteria that you have to be within an existing Jewish community. Judaism began without an existing Jewish community. Under this absurd ruling, Abraham would not be considered a Jew because he didn't live in an existing Jewish community. He just created one. And the absurdity of not allowing these people to come in, I have to tell you, I will not rest until this decision is reversed, whether we have to take political action, whether we have to take legal action. We're talking about human beings here who are at risk. And the first thing that Israel must do is rescue them. Then, Jews can debate anything, but we should debate in the context of them being safe. We should not be debating while risking their lives. So rabbis, shape up, go back, read the Talmud, read the Torah, understand pikuach nefesh, the saving of lives, put that first, and then have your debates.
Thanks for your response, Professor. Let's turn to a question from here in the Israeli parliament from a very unlikely source. Kevin Dean Hales is from Los Angeles, California, but for the last 14 years has helped run the Knesset cafeteria, serving almost every top leader in the nation. Let's hear what's on his mind.
Hi, Alan. My name is Kevin. I'm a native of Los Angeles, California, but I've been working for the last 14 years at the Knesset. And believe me, I can tell you a lot of state secrets about what people in the Knesset really like to eat. So I'm not here to answer any questions. I'm here to ask you one. My question would be, what do you think of being able to have a different political system here in Israel, whereby instead of a proportional electoral, we have something more like in the United States, where it's a two-party system? How do you think that would work here in the state of Israel? Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, Kevin, thank you so much. I've eaten your food repeatedly because I come to the Knesset from time to time, and I appreciate your great culinary service to the leaders of of Israel. Just one comment. Israeli food has improved so much over the 47 years that I've been regularly coming to Israel. I have to tell you, when I first came there in 1970, the food, except in people's homes, was nothing to brag about. Now, some of the finest restaurants that I've ever eaten in are in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and Herzliya and Haifa and many other places. So congratulations on becoming a great country for foodies. Every country has to have a political system that suits its people. In America, the two-party system has evolved. There are questions, there are challenges to it. We had people running on third and fourth parties this year. We've had some very substantial third parties throughout history, the Bulmus Party, other parties. I think the Israeli legal system clearly has to be reformed. The threshold is too low to get into the Knesset. It should be much higher. I would like to see, if not a two-party system, at least no more than a handful of parties. I think today there are too many parties. It's very hard to govern with the kind of coalitions that have to be put together. Coalitions should reflect a consensus on governance, and today's coalitions don't reflect that kind of consensus on governance. Even Britain had problems when they had three parties, and the Conservatives had to form a coalition with the Liberal Party. And so I think that the more you can create consensus in governance, the better governance will be. So I would like to see changes in the Israeli legal system, but I don't think you will ever move toward a winner-take-all, two-party, non-proportional representation system of the kind we have in the United States.
Do you believe that it's possible for Israel to do that? Could we change the way the system exists right now?
It's very hard of the Knesset to pass rules that would unemploy several of their own members. That's always very hard. And when you have a higher threshold for election to the Knesset, that means that many of the people who currently serve in the Knesset and who get to vote on this change would be no longer serving in the Knesset. So it's very hard to do. It would take an overwhelming feeling by the Israeli public that this is a change that has to be made.
Great, thanks, Professor. Now, to bring our viewers' questions to a close, our final question comes from your favorite source, a young student. Kobe Hamilton is from Boston, Massachusetts, and he's short and to the point, which we know you'll like.
Hi, Professor Dershowitz. I'm Kobe. I'm a student from Boston. Me and all of my fellow students, we're pretty short attention span. So if you could summarize the importance of Israel in one sentence, how would you describe it to someone like me?
Hey, Kobe, thank you so much. No country in the history of the world has ever contributed so much to humanity as Israel has done in the fewer than 70 years of its existence. No country in the world faced with threats similar to those faced by Israel has had a better record of human rights, higher compliance with the rule of law, and more concern with civilians. Israel is an imperfect democracy, as are all democracies, but you should be very proud of Israel and never, never be ashamed of expressing criticism of Israel's imperfections. You know, Israel, the nation state of the Jewish people, is a great accomplishment, one of the greatest accomplishments of Jewish history and one of the greatest accomplishments of human history, to finally create a homeland for the Jewish people after so many years of homelessness and so many years of being persecuted.
Now, I'd just like to ask a final question to you regarding the case that we saw today, and speaking about Israel as such a wonderful nation. Many people here are scared that they can no longer trust the military with their children. You know, at 18 years old, every young person here is obligated to go into the military, and after Elor Azaria's trial and conviction, there is a deep fear that less young people here will want to go into combat. What do you say to those who feel that they can no longer trust the military in the same way?
Well, I think the military is one of the most trusted institutions in Israel, and deservedly so. It has saved Israel repeatedly from 1948 to 1967 to 1973, and through the various attacks, terrorist attacks and threats that are now posed. I think the Israeli people have to trust their military. I know many of the leaders of the military. These are great people, brilliant people. Several of them have gone on from military careers to political careers. Don't judge the military on the basis of one action either the action of the young man who shot or the action of the judges that found him guilty. Look over time. Don't ever take a snapshot. Do a video. And if you do a video of the Israeli military, you'll find it is extraordinary in the way it integrates Israeli society, the way it prepares young people for careers in high tech, and the way it trains people in high standards of morality. So don't judge based on one episode or one incident in a long history. I think when looked at from the point of view of history, the Israeli military will stand out as one of the greatest and most moral militaries in the history of humankind.
Thanks so much for your response, Professor. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for your time. And I would also like to thank all of our guests, especially Colonel Pnina Sharvit Baruch, Major General Dani Atom, and of course, Rabbi Bill Hamilton. If you'd like Professor Dershowitz to answer your questions, go to iltv.tv or our Facebook page and submit them. We'll see you again next week.